Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Leah Swanberg, and I'm the founder of Canadian Fertility Consultants. Today's webinar, we are going to explore how to select a surrogate, a Canadian perspective. When we talk to intended parents, we always want to ensure that they are bringing themselves forward and making decisions that are best for them. And one of the largest decisions, or I would say the largest decision you can make when building your family through surrogacy, is who the person you partner with on this journey is, and do they meet the criteria of your clinic, legal requirements in Canada, or if you are abroad, do they meet those legal requirements? And then as well, just love to give you some advice on what I've seen over the last 20 years work and potentially not work. So we are joined today by Cindy Wasser of Hope Springs Fertility Law and Dr. Lee Brack of Create Fertility Center. We will add them on shortly, but I wanted to quickly talk about surrogacy in a more general term, and to really share when we've seen matches go well and when we've seen intended parent struggles, what has been the differential, what has been the factor that has tipped it good or not, and hopefully there's something there for you. So again, welcome. If you have questions, there's a chat on the side. Please feel free to ask any questions. I will post now the spot to ask them. So for many intended parents who are entering the Canadian market or coming to Canada or are in Canada and beginning their surrogacy journey, often it is after unsuccessful attempts for themselves, for our heterosexual clients, failed adoptions, and for our same-sex male couples, they may be coming to us from a part of the world that surrogacy and adoption just are not available yet. And so often as people come into our program, we begin to talk about sort of what brought them here, what they've heard about surrogacy in Canada, what they know about surrogacy in other destinations, so we can really get clear on what considerations what considerations matter, and what considerations are really just myths or pieces of information that the internet has sensationalized as you begin to build your family. And so, first of all, we work with hundreds of amazing people each year who enter our program as surrogates, doing their due diligence on the process and deciding whether or not it's right for them. And as surrogates enter our program, intended parents are entering as well. And one thing we know for sure is that there are values that people hold, whether it's you as intended parents or your surrogate, that really need to match up in order to move forward. And so when we look at what those may be, they are often around selective reduction if multiple pregnancy arises, termination if there's a medical abnormality. That's really an immovable value. So we look at that and go, we don't want to ask based on your preferences. We want to ask prior to you providing us your preferences. And then we look at other pieces that we believe are immovable. Where she lives. This is where she lives. This is the community she'll remain in during her pregnancy. And so as you're looking at surrogate profiles, or even before, when you're talking to your lawyer or when you're talking to your physician and, finding out where you can engage in surrogacy. And so if that is Canada, welcome. We're excited to work with you. And so, her termination values are immovable. Where she lives is immovable because surrogates in Canada stay in their communities, unlike, sort of other third world type countries where, they house them during the pregnancy. And then when we look at other pieces that are important around surrogacy, we ask intended parents to look at, her wage replacement if she's unwell. And so really looking at, Is she a nurse? Is she, we, had a surrogate enter our program very recently who's a physician. Is she a stay-at-home mom? What that wage replacement looks like, because selecting a surrogate in Canada means that you are responsible for the surrogate that is caring for you during the pregnancy and for the 6, 8, 10 weeks post-delivery. So ensuring that that is something you can cover. And I always suggest to intended parents to really get their numbers down first before they start looking at surrogates, so that they are really clear that something is a yes or an absolute no as they move forward. Another thing that we tend to call a semi-movable, immovable value is the type of relationship that a surrogate wants. Many surrogates come into our program, and many intended parents, and they just don't know what a relationship would look like with a surrogate or with intended parents. And so often we will sort of chip away at that. Are you wanting daily contact? Are you wanting weekly contact? And so as you review that on a surrogate profile with our program or another program, just know that we really suggest to intended parents, and most agencies do, that you follow the surrogate's lead and know that, that may shift if a relationship develops with the surrogate. If a relationship begins to grow, you may end up with more contact. But we often find you may end up with more contact, but if a surrogate says she wants lots of contact, it usually doesn't go back the other way. So something really important to consider. As well, we will have Dr. Liebrack on talking about the medical side of things and what he deems important from a medical perspective. And again, I think really looking at the partners you put in place through this journey, whether it's an agency, we can tell you if a surrogate has a criminal record, and our surrogates don't, they have to complete a criminal record check. But we can tell you that. We can tell you that we've spoken to her and her partner, if she has a partner, and that they understand the process of surrogacy. But our agency is not staffed by medical professionals. And so the doctor is really the one to give information on that. As well, the legal process. There are questions that you'll want to ask yourself before you engage in Canada. And we'll have Cindy Wasser on discussing that as well. And so when we're looking at medical considerations or we're looking at legal considerations, we really want intended parents in our program, and really any program I think would stand on this, that we want you to have done your homework first, so that when you enter the program, you're really clear on what matters, what doesn't, and that a surrogate that is put forward to you, that that yes, this could be a fit, or no, this couldn't. And so one of the key pieces there is, does she fit my fertility clinic's criteria? And so when you're working with a clinic, if you don't have a clinic yet, we would love to refer you to one. If you don't have a lawyer yet, of course, we'd love to refer you to one. And you're going to hear from two great people here shortly. And so knowing that that you've spoken to a lawyer first, and where you can engage in surrogacy, and whether that's a lawyer in your jurisdiction and a lawyer in Canada, we want you to talk to both, to be sure. And then talking to a doctor right at the beginning as you begin your process. What should I be looking for in a surrogate? Because often people entering surrogacy find a surrogate, like they start talking about it on their social platforms, and all of a sudden their sister's cousin is coming forward as a surrogate, and she lives in Canada, or she lives in Toronto, or whatever the case may be. And so with that, we really want you to have those answers ahead of time. So I will be bringing on Cindy next. She is from Hope Springs Fertility Law, and she will be talking about the legal process in Canada and what that means when you're beginning to look at what you're looking for in a surrogate.
Hi, thanks, Leah. So um, I can't see any questions, so please interrupt me as they come in, and I'll address them as quickly as I can. So, in terms of what we do at Hope Springs, is we like to have a consultation with the intended parent as soon as they're referred to us. And it's a very general overview of the legal process and of us, so that they're choosing us based on knowledge of our expertise and knowledge of the way we work, which is really efficiently with amazing staff and services. But we also want to talk in general about how the process works. And so we do an overview of what they should expect. And then I like to narrow in on right away on talking about what to look for when you start working with the agency for your surrogate. And one of the services we offer is a review of the profiles that you might send them, or whatever agency sends them if they have that opportunity. And because I'm not a medical professional, and I know you're smiling, Leah, because I know Dr. Lee Brack is sitting there going, yeah, but you keep saying you are, but I don't say I am. I do see things and I highlight them. So I'll look at the obvious medical issue we might see on a profile is the medications that a surrogate is taking. And I'll say, please address that with someone at the clinic right away. And the reason why I do that is because we all know that some medications are fine on pregnancy and some are not. What I don't know is which and to what extent. So I don't want to give advice other than look into that. But the thing I will tell them is the way that works, depending on where the surrogate lives in Canada. It may take a while for the medication to change if it has to. And so that needs to be addressed with the doctor or the nurse at the clinic to get more information, or maybe with the agency and the surrogate to say, hey, she's willing to change. That's amazing. What does that look like where she lives in terms of timing? Because availability has a definition that I think means immediately, subject to certain conditions like passing medical screening. It doesn't mean 9 months or 10 months because of the change in medication. So that's a big one. The other one is the agency should be disclosing if there have been other surrogacy journeys and the outcome. And it's great when we know that there were babies. There's often I see on the profile a list of how many babies a surrogate has had, separating between her own and saying whether they were surrogacy, and that's fabulous. But what we also want to make sure is that the agency tells them if they've had unsuccessful journeys, meaning miscarriage, losses, or simply transfers that weren't successful. And that's always a touchy thing. Again, it's mostly medical advice. So it's important for them to be told that they should discuss that with the clinic as well. And if it's at the same clinic, they're going to get a lot of information. But if the surrogate was at another clinic, we want to make sure the current clinic has that information and looks at it. Because I'm sure Dr. Liebrack's going to go through this, especially since I'm talking about it now. A non-successful transfer or even a late-term horrible loss with somebody's embryo doesn't predict the future with someone else's embryo, or even with the same person's embryo next time. There's too many variables. My job is simply to bring it to people's attention so that they can get knowledge to make informed decisions. One of the other things I like to talk about that has nothing to do with the medical is the process of birth registration, which depends on the province in which the surrogate lives. That's where she will have the baby. And each province and territory in Canada has a slightly different procedure and timeline for obtaining registration and the birth certificate, and how many parents can go on it, for example. So it's very important for the intended parents to know what that will look like. So we do an overview. And then once retained, we actually give our clients a little cheat sheet that they can look at every time you send a profile in. They can say, oh, she's in this province. It's a court order. Only it will take 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or we can do an administrative one. And of course, there are issues about her marital status that seem to come up for foreigners in certain.
Is there, or is that a myth? Because I will
No,
stop.
it's not a myth that
I'm not stopping you on medical information because Dr. Liebrecht's going to do that, I hope, next. But
yeah, you can talk about the law.
But does a surrogate need to be married for any country in the world?
So the answer is it's complicated.
No, is it
My
yes?
answer is no, she does not.
Thank you.
For them to obtain legal status in their country. Why I say it's complicated is because the lawyers in their countries that we always say they should speak to often say to them, she should be single in some countries. And the reason they say that is because some countries have, many countries have universal health care as we do in Canada. So one of the intended parents has to be deemed the father, so that their nationality is automatically granted the second of birth and therefore health care. And so if the surrogate is married in those countries, there's a presumption that her husband is the father, and so that insurance will not be available to them in their country automatically. And so we've had this issue where they struggle to find a single surrogate. Well, most surrogates are married. They have children and they may be separated, which is a whole other problem, mythically. But so the marital status is a big thing. And it's a question of the lawyer in their country may also say, well, it's not an obstacle. It's a hurdle because you have to do certain things. My time, I'm going to spend more money in my time fixing this, doing that. So it's about money. And I don't practice in that country, so it's very hard for me to know how much is involved in that change to say, is it worth it? But it's your call. Wait another 6 months to find that, unicorn surrogate who's not married. Balance that out, because I know even in my country, there are lawyers who will say, oh, that's complicated. I'm going to have to do this and this and this, and that's going to cost so much more. And when I know it doesn't. So there's always that. So, it's very hard. But we always talk to the lawyers. I work very closely. I have a network of lawyers in almost every country. So I get down to the nitty gritty of what they have to do, why it would cost more, and help the client make that wise decision. Then I raised her marital status when she's separated but not divorced. Many European countries don't recognize that status as we have in Canada. She's either married or she isn't, black and white. Divorced is not married, never married, single is not married. But if she's married but not living with the spouse because they're separated, that's married. So then they say, well, we need his consent on all the documents. So the first thing we have to say to the surrogate is, can you get that? That's the easiest thing. Is he willing to say, sure, I don't care? In most cases of separation, there's some animosity. That's not going to be easy. So we need to know all those things in advance. Ideally, the agency has figured that out before they make that match. Otherwise, it creates a lot of anxiety because they've come to know each other. Money's being put on the table, and now we're going back and forth. So at my end, as soon as I speak to clients, I say, speak to your foreign lawyer now, find out what it means if the surrogate you haven't met yet is married, single, divorced. We write affidavits explaining separated or common law. I forgot that one. That's another great one. Common law doesn't exist as a status in those countries. It's single. She's either married or she's not. So sometimes it makes me remember how privileged we are in this country to be recognized for what we do and who we are at the moment.
Cindy, could you address a question that has come up often for intended parents with newcomers to Canada and reviewing profiles of surrogates who are here on various statuses? I know with it at CFC, we worked with Stephen Green, who's an amazing immigration lawyer, and his team to sort of create key categories, and we understand now from his office, and then I'd love for you to comment on that, refugee claimant, so someone who has come to Canada on a plane and said, hey, I'm here, I can't leave, is a no. Refugee status is a yes. Work permit extending 18 months is a yes. student visa extending over 1 year is a yes. Permanent permanent resident card is a yes. And that as long as we know that this person is in a province in which their medical insurance is covered either privately through their school or through the immigration consultant that got them here, or that they have it through their province, that they are good. If you could comment on all of that, that would be great.
How long is this webinar?
I know, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, I have 5 minutes.
The whole rest of all the things.
Okay, so the main issues, if you think about it at all times, is does she have health care and is she here safely, securely, and won't be deported while pregnant?
Right.
From other countries' perspectives, for our foreign clients, they have different immigration policies and different ways of thinking of this woman in terms of parental status. So many countries do not recognize the surrogate as a surrogate. They're still seeing her as the mother until the intended parents complete their process of parentage recognition in that country.
Right.
And they have a problem in that if a woman shows up in their country pregnant, or say before the process is finished and the parents have the baby and says that's the baby I carried, they're recognizing her as the mother.
Right.
So that creates a whole other fear that's not a Canadian issue at all. So we're looking at a court case where the judge has to rule in the interests of the child. Best interest of the child will be the intended parents in most countries that we'd be dealing with anyway. But these countries are concerned because they're having immigration issues, as they call it, and they are trying to prevent certain people from coming in. So they're giving the intended parents a hard time with that. So that's what's happening on that side. Again, alleviated by following my advice in that first call and speaking to your local lawyer about what's a problem and what isn't. And I raise these things. On our end, if she's in this country as a refugee, she hasn't been dealt with yet. She's coming off the plane. She's in a whole place waiting to be heard. So we get refugees from war-torn countries, Syria, Gaza, Israel, anywhere. We also get them from the United States in hordes, again. And we don't think the Americans with briefcases are refugees. So we're saying, sorry, you voted, go back. But we're looking at someone from Syria, Afghanistan, who managed to get here and saying, okay, we're going to deal with you, but it's not automatic. And it can take a very long time. And every time there's a war like Ukraine, we're bringing everybody in, and then we're backlogged several 100,000 applications for years, and we don't have the money to staff them. That person is not safe. Yeah. Once they've been given refugee status, they're here. Short of committing horrendous crimes, they're not being deported. So they're pretty safe. And when they come from those countries that are really refugee status countries, they don't want to do anything to get back. They're amazing people. So they make wonderful, angel-like, beautiful surrogates. Student visas are my difficult one. Work visas, again, technically it depends on the job. If they lose that job, their visa's up. But once they're here on a work visa, they can still use that to get another job. And if they're pregnant, Stephen Green has said to us, the likelihood of them being deported while pregnant, especially as a surrogate for someone else's baby, with all the complications that would arise, are about nil. The student visa is the one that gives me grief. So the student visa is a special visa granted, and in Canada, granted hugely wide program to people who want to come and study here. And as long as they're enrolled in a school that's recognized, and almost all are, they will also be given the opportunity not just to stay for the program, but to have health insurance. But the health insurance program for students is run through the college or university or the educational institution. It's not run through the provincial government like we have. So it's tied into being a student. This has been a wonderful program for many years. In the last year or so, there's been a lot of noise due to terrorist activities and allegations that we're letting in too many people and that they're actually not enrolled in school, and they're, driving Ubers, waitressing, getting any job they can to make ends meet, which should be applauded as industrious, but it breaches the terms. And if they're not enrolled in school, from your perspective, they may not have proper health care. They're undercover.
Yeah.
Underground. So obviously, if they're bleeding, they go to the hospital, a doctor has to treat them. Our hospitals treat refugees all the time without health care, or people who don't have it for some reason, like students. They will never turn them away. But the clinic is another problem, and OB is another problem. These are not emergency situations, and the intended parents will be on the hook for all the health care, which will be expensive. And if something goes wrong in the hospital from the pregnancy, we don't know how much, just too much. So the healthcare is critical. So there's a crackdown now with Immigration Canada in the last year or so saying we're cracking down on the student visas and we're getting rid of them all. So we don't know what that means actually when they say it. It could be posturing, but we have to act as if it's real to protect our clients and the surrogate. I mean, imagine what she's going through, pregnant, no health care, and being sent back to her horrendous country. That's a miscarriage waiting to happen. And that's tragic because she has no care. So we want to keep her from being in that position as well. Even if she is underground, we don't want to bring attention to it by her getting, going to an obstetrician now. We just want to say, go get things together. Good luck to you.
And as you're working, I just want to stop you there. As you're working with an agency, your agency is going to be working through this issue with the lawyers. And the reason I raise it is because, typically you will hear, the body mass index, the number of children, the number of C-sections, where she lives in Canada, and we stop there. And I think that there is pause needed as we are a country that welcomes newcomers. And I think it is a point that as we see more women joining surrogacy programs, that there's just that one more check, that one more balance, similar to a criminal record check and criminal to a vulnerable sector check, to ensure that the person that is carrying your child is someone that is, safe to be in this country and safe to be around children. So thank you on that, Cindy. And then my last question to you would be, is there any other item that you would suggest to intended parents to get really clear on prior to reviewing surrogates profiles from a legal perspective?
The biggest, abortion.
Okay.
So in Canada, everybody has a constitutional right to control their own bodies. That applies to men and women equally. From the surrogacy perspective, it means a woman has the right to control her reproductive choices, which means nobody, regardless of the surrogacy contract, commitment to the agency, money paid, whatever, no one can take her kicking and screaming to the doctor's office to get pregnant. And the doctor should not do the transfer when he sees that she is in distress and saying, I don't want to do this, and they're forcing me. That just doesn't happen in this country. So, but that equally applies to the issue of staying pregnant or not staying pregnant. So we have it going both ways. We have a situation where some point in the pregnancy, medical examinations say we've got a problem with the fetus, and you may want to talk about terminating this pregnancy. Just because this was done with the intention of giving a baby to the intended parents doesn't mean they have control over that decision. She does, because in Canada, we don't recognize that fetus as a human being until it's born. There must be a heartbeat and a brainwave, and that's within seconds of birth. But while it's a fetus, it is as much of her body as is her nose or arms. So she makes that decision. She will make it in a good relationship based on what the intended parents would want, but she could still say, they may say, we want to keep the baby and take our chances and love it and run its course. She may say, I can't do that. She can abort it. They may say, we can't risk this. We want you to abort. She may say, I will not. And so the agency plays a critical role at the outset, at intake with a surrogate, to give her space, gratitude, and respect to be completely safe in saying her views. And no one in this country should ever think for one moment that they can persuade a woman to change those views. That's not how it works here. So we want to tell the intended parents in the intake call as well, both agency and lawyer, make sure you are equally clear with your views. Take the time, discuss it together. Don't pretend. Don't think, well, everything's testing. And this is where Dr. Liebrecht can speak. What actually is tested? What are the risks and when would they appear? So that intended parents can put on their profile, we're cool, or we would want termination for this. Where I freak out, frankly, is that in between space where surrogates and intended parents say something like, only if it's serious, only if it's life-threatening, only if the child will not have a fabulous life. Quality of life. Like if you ask my teenage kids if they have quality of life, they probably say no, because I don't let them stay on their iPhone 24/7, or I haven't bought them the latest version. Like I was the same. I hated my parents because I couldn't get a phone back in the day in my room, never mind a line. So what's quality of life? But on a serious note, is it being in a wheelchair? Is it having an oxygen tube? Is it a cleft palate? Is it missing a digit? I don't know. My definition, your definition, their definition could be so substantially different that we could litigate it until the child goes to college. So let's just make it a yes or no, please, for the lawyers, or a very specific thing. Many times we'll see not for Down syndrome. Is that even an issue that we should be looking at as an exception? So it's about education. And I'd love Dr. Liebrecht to deal with those issues on a very detailed basis, because it's so critical. We don't know how to draft.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. And, just to frame all of that, I heard you talk about the surrogate status in Canada. I heard you talk about where she lives, and, once you're retained, providing a cheat sheet to intended parents. I heard you talk about her marital status based on where the intended parents are in the world, and your ability to refer those on this webinar to a lawyer in their country of residence. And then I just heard you talk about this termination issue, and really being clear and having an agreement either with yourself or your partner prior to an agreement with an agency or a surrogate or anyone else. I think even before you're at the clinic, to really know, so that you can decide, am I genetically testing my embryos? Is that something important? And why would that make me more attracted to a surrogate? So did I catch everything?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many others, but I think they're more social issues that you should be addressing. But those are the top legal ones. Absolutely.
Excellent. So I'm going to now add Dr. Liebrecht to the stage to share his views on the screening process of surrogates and what matters, what's a myth, and we'll go from there. So thank you, Cindy. We'll bring you on at the end just to say thank you.
Hi.
Excellent. Hi, Dr. Liebrecht. How are you?
Good. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Perfect. So we've been talking a lot about surrogates and the legal piece for intended parents as they're entering into a surrogacy in Canada. And, there's a lot of conversation about, what makes a good surrogate, what makes a bad surrogate, and I would love to get your feedback on what criteria really matters and what criteria does not, if you would.
Sure. I want to start by just saying how incredible women in this country that do this are, because, in our country, you you get paid for your expenses, but of course you should be, but it shouldn't cost you money. But the fact that you're doing this to help someone is from your heart, to really help someone have a child, is an incredible group of women that do this. And I'm always in awe of the women that do this every day, and I see them in my clinic every single day. So I have to say that that's an amazing thing about Canada. So how do we screen surrogates? Well, we do a full medical screening, and that would involve things like taking a medical history, learning about their background in terms of their medications, if they're taking any kind of medical problems they've had, surgery, and also of course their pregnancies. So we want to learn all about all of their pregnancies to make sure they were safe pregnancies, because we're looking at the safety of the surrogate and also the safety of the babies for the intended parents. So we want to make sure that when she goes through this process, it is safe for her to do that.
So when intended parents look at a profile, Dr. Liebrecht, and it says number of pregnancies, number of C-sections, medications, for the number of pregnancies, is there a number, or is it just, based on the health of those pregnancies?
I think that we have to look, there are some studies that show that if you've had more than 5 pregnancies, there might be a higher risk, but we have to look at all the pregnancies individually and each person individually and see if their last pregnancies were very safe and there was no problem. And I think for that reason, most of those surrogates can go on and have more than 5 pregnancies.
Okay.
Medications, we have to look at what medication they are on. Are they safe for the baby and for them to be on during their pregnancy? And if there's an alternative, we can switch to an alternative that's safer. There's always some gray zones in some medication, but there's very good data in most medication that show that they're safe to take during a pregnancy.
Okay. And so I know at our agency, and I imagine with all the agencies, we send forward, the surrogate's profile and some medical information, including medication she's on. And, you as a, OBGYN, now fertility doctor for 30 years, sort of let us know, like, yes, she could take this. No, she would need to switch to something else. And I wonder if you're noticing the same thing I am with this large sort of uptick since COVID of women being on antidepressant and anxiety medication, and what you think of that, because I see it very commonly on surrogate profiles.
Yeah. I mean, some people are not, I think, assessed as well as they should be to see if they need to be on those medications.
Okay.
Bit of a problem in our current medical system because doctors are busy, they don't have time to do psychoanalysis and all these things. So I think there is an overuse of them, but I do think that the majority of them are very safe for a pregnancy. We want to make sure that if she needs to be on the medication, that she needs to be on it because it will help her to cope with the pregnancy and be able to do everything safely for her.
Okay. And in terms of C-sections, we see that a lot. This question mark around women who have had, 1, 2, 3 C-sections. And can you just talk a little bit about why it matters that someone may have had more than 2 C-sections, if it even does?
Well, you can have 1 C-section and the healing of that C-section scar is not very good. It's called an isthmocele, where there's a poor healing and it's kind of paper thin, and that would not be safe for the pregnancy. They would either need to not be a surrogate or have a repair before that was done. So it can happen with 1 C-section, 2, 3. I think what I like to do is to assess that particular uterus to see if the scars have healed well. And if they're healed well, it doesn't matter how many scars there are, as long as they are healed well, there should be no increased risk to the surrogate and the babies.
Okay. And then another piece on profiles that intended parents often ask about, and I'm kind of curious about this too, to be honest, is often intended parents will say to us, the surrogate's profile looks great, but she hasn't had a child in 5 years. Is she still fertile?
So fertility is really not related to how long it's been since your last birth. It's
Okay.
really, it doesn't seem to make any difference how long the last birth was,
Okay.
as long as they're healthy. And the key is that their health is good. They haven't developed diabetes or high blood pressure, something that might put them and the baby at risk. And again, I say might because it depends on each circumstance. But I think that the length of time since the last birth, we haven't seen any difference at all.
Really? Okay. We see that question so often. And then another question that people will often ask is they'll see a profile, they think she's great. She lives in a rural community and it's staffed by midwifery care, not obstetrical care. There's no big hospital. What do you think in terms of an IVF pregnancy, a woman pregnant through IVF going back into sort of a smaller community for care?
So again, it depends on if they've had low risk pregnancies, there should be no reason why the next pregnancy is even lower risk. Sometimes, their first pregnancy is often the most risky because you don't know how well they'll do with their pregnancy and birth. But if they've had previous healthy births, they should be fine as long as there is access to care, where they can get care for a C-section if they're with a midwife, for example, or they can get, premature baby care if there was ever a premature birth. So I think that, yes, it is harder when they're in a remote area, but as long as there is access to care, I feel that that's, I'm comfortable with them giving birth there.
Okay. So the $1 million question that everyone sort of seems to hyperfixate on. And I think that we are in a fat phobic culture, to be honest with you, as someone who's been much heavier and, even during my pregnancies and surrogacies, I'd like to talk about when intended parents are looking at a surrogate's profile and she has a high BMI. What do they need to drill down on? What do they need to be asking the agency about around the surrogate's BMI?
So this is really an excellent question. I've been doing surrogacy over 25 years now, and I think that that's something that I, was concerned about at the beginning. But when I saw the results that we're getting with surrogates that are overweight, they were doing fine. And so I think what we have to look at surrogacy, women that are going through surrogacy, they are a select population of women who've had healthy births at whatever weight they're at. And so that's really the key here. And, and I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, so I do a lot of research. So I said, well, let's ask this question, does BMI matter in surrogates? And it does, of course, in fertility patients that are haven't children yet. There are some associations of high BMI with complications. But in surrogates who have had fully healthy pregnancies at whatever weight they're at, I did the study and we showed no difference. And other groups have also done the study and showed the same thing. So we have not been restrictive on BMI as long as they didn't gain a lot of weight since their last pregnancy. That might be a concern because then they're not at the same weight they had those healthy births. So we always ask, how has your weight been since your last pregnancies? Has it changed much? And as long as they're within a certain amount, a reasonable amount of weight of that pregnancy, we don't see any difference whatsoever.
Okay, excellent. And we now ask that question as well. I see that this is your BMI. Was this your BMI the last time you achieved a pregnancy? And thank you for that, because we didn't sort of have that extra piece around, have you gained 100 pounds since your last pregnancy is very different than having the same BMI throughout childbearing years and sort of pregnancy health. So the other question that I have with the sort of rampant use now of Ozempic and weight loss drugs, if surrogates are disqualified, discluded, not able to participate if they are on Ozempic or other types of medications similar to.
So the safety of these weight loss medications is still not clear.
Okay.
So most recommendations are they must stop a few weeks before they get pregnant.
Okay.
It's a long time, and they're given once a week, so they tend to be out of your system within a week of taking them. So we say about 2 to 3 weeks before they do their transfer, they should be off them. And I
Okay.
think that's really what we know now. Maybe that will change,
Okay.
but right now that seems to be safe.
Okay, excellent. We often are seeing this large uptick of women who are using these medications, and so it's great to have that question answered. And then in terms of surrogates who are entering programs in Canada, and we're seeing sort of more interest from women who have decided to be childless, to not have children of their own, but are wanting to participate as surrogates. And I'm wondering um, what you think about that. And I'm going to say before you answer, I want to give a little bit of an opinion because I didn't talk about it in the beginning about my own, our criteria as an agency. Our criteria of an agency is 21, 47 years of age, healthy pregnancies or not in some cases that we'll talk about next, living in Canada, understanding they're going through a psychosocial assessment, medical assessment, are English speaking to communicate with our team or French speaking to communicate with our team, and up for the adventure. But we're seeing this uptick of women in Canada. As we know, we're not replacing ourselves, so women who are not having children. And I'm wondering what you think about that, and if you can give a little bit of a comment on success rates with this new population entering surrogacy.
So it's not common, I have to say. We do
Yeah.
see some cases like that where they really want to give birth to a baby. They don't want their own children. And so, we've always said you must already have children to be a surrogate because we have
Yeah.
a proven pregnancy, a healthy birth before that. So we kind of bend the rules nowadays. We're a little bit more liberal about it. And what we do is we have two of our counselors each independently talk to this person to feel very comfortable that they're making a decision that's right for them and that they feel they understand some of the psychosocial aspects of this. Of course, we will assess them from a medical point of view, and
Right.
it's very healthy and no problem. We have definitely had some cases, but it's a very small number, I have to say. So I don't have a lot of experience yet with it, but because it just doesn't seem to be something that a lot of women that have never had children want to do. But if they do, we will accept those situations when under certain circumstances.
Excellent. And just for those who are listening to this, we as well require a psychosocial assessment prior to the clinic's two assessments, as well as for the person entering our program to be 30 years of age with no medications, no known health issues, a career that allows flexibility, or we don't have sort of a track record on bed rest or cessation of work, and we don't with any, every surrogate entering our program is an individual person, but we really try to look at that a little bit differently because there isn't a history of pregnancy health or bed rest or what happened. And so we want to make sure we're adding that in. And my final question.
I wanted to say one thing. I think
Yeah.
one thing that we haven't talked about is
Yeah.
age, because that's
Okay.
often a factor that people ask me about. If she's 42 or 23, should I pick the 23-year-old?
Right.
I think it's a really common question, so I wanted to make sure we talk about it. So basically, in my opinion, that if they're healthy, it doesn't matter that they've given birth to babies, whether they're 23 or 42, it doesn't make any difference. And I actually, in some ways, almost prefer someone who's more mature, only because they're more stable sometimes, and some of the surrogates that are in their early 20s, maybe their life can change in 5 minutes. They're at a different stage in their life, so we may have surrogates that drop out because they're just changed their mind or are not able to do it. So I'm not saying we shouldn't pick a 23-year-old or 25-year-old that wants to be a surrogate, but don't discount the one that's 40 or 41. The only thing you might want to consider is if they're kind of even more advanced, like 45 or so, and you want two children and you want to have them as your sibling journey, you may want to pick someone a bit younger, maybe early 40s or late 30s, to be able to have two children with the same surrogate if they're willing to do that. So I think age also is really something that we should only consider in the sense of health.
Well, and I use myself as an example with intended parents all the time. 20 years ago, I was much, you know, I'm healthier now than I was 20 years ago. And, I had high blood pressure then. I don't now. I was pre-diabetic then. I'm not now. So I think, yeah, today we have access to so much more that will help us to be healthier and take better care of ourselves. And I think that's a movement I love seeing among women and among moms in terms of self-care and really prioritizing our health so that we can take care of ourselves and our families and our partners and all of those things. So I think that's really great. One thing I would just like to touch on quickly is, before we end, and I know I've got some questions on Instagram and some questions in the comments, is what do you think about surrogates, or as you're reviewing profiles that agencies send you, if the surrogate says she's not comfortable with termination, what does that tell you? And if it's a religious view and the intended parents are religious and it's a match, or you're just seeing the profile blind, what do you think of that?
No, I think everybody has the right to have religious views about termination of pregnancy. Obviously, they have to be aligned with the intended parents, because if the intended parents want to be able to make that decision when there's a serious illness that might affect the child long term, they're actually, they're going to be looking after the child. So if that's not compatible with them, they should just say, you know what, she might be wonderful, but before you meet her, let's look at somebody else instead. Because otherwise you're just engaging with someone who's unlikely to be compatible with you. It will be on your legal contract, as Cindy will tell you, but you don't want to wait till you're doing a legal contract to find that out. You want to know that before you meet her so you can see if she is compatible with you.
No, absolutely. And so just to recap, we talked about BMI and your study, and we'll include that when we send this webinar out. We talked about age and maturity and, looking at, differences between younger or older surrogates. We looked at Ozempic use and stopping it prior. You talked about your screening process, which is fantastic. C-sections, and really it coming down to how the body healed after a C-section. Number of pregnancies again, each person being an individual, as well as number of pregnancies, as well as BMI at the time of pregnancy, the number of years from last pregnancy not impacting a decision of a surrogate, as well as anxiety and depression medications, which I agree with you. They're just being handed out because no one wants to have that tough conversation about what's really going on for women in Canada. And it's really, really, I feel like an epidemic among young women we're seeing. And so I agree with you. And then, looking at what they can stay on, what they shouldn't stay on. And one other question. So did I captured all of those points with you? Yes.
Yep, very well.
Okay. My last question. Many of our clients who are from outside of Canada may not know about our legalized cannabis in Canada, and that there's this cannabis culture among people, and they're, using cannabis instead of sort of having a glass of wine at the end of the day. And I guess my question for you is, when intended parents see cannabis use on a profile, or smoking, that someone's recently quit smoking, or those two things, when is the sort of they need to stop by, and what do you say about that in terms of affecting fertility?
Okay, so definitely, as part of our urine toxicology test we do on all surrogates to make sure they're not smoking cigarettes or taking drugs or things like that, or medications that could be harmful to the baby, we'll find out those things right away.
Yeah.
And with cannabis, it's complicated because it's a legal substance in Canada, but we just don't know. And we're doing actually a lot of research on this, and we're going to be publishing papers on cannabis and its effect on fertility, and we don't really know enough. So our feeling is that err on the side of caution. Do not smoke cannabis or take edibles during your pregnancy, because we just don't know if it's safe or not for the baby, and we don't want to take a chance in this situation. And also smoking, of course, they must stop before they can be a surrogate.
Yeah. And that's, we see it very commonly on, on profiles, and we have that conversations, and surrogates seem very amenable to that. They're like, well, of course, I wouldn't smoke during pregnancy. I wouldn't drink. I wouldn't use cannabis products, but we do see it really often. And, once they get to you, they've stopped using those products. But I just want to high level that for intended parents outside of Canada, or even in Canada, if you're not a cannabis user, there are, our government is collecting tax dollars over tax dollars on it now because it is legal. And so just to know that may be something on the profile that we are all aware of, and know that it's something happening in Canada. So I have a couple of questions in my DMs. One of them is, are the surrogates international or from Canada? The surrogates are living in Canada, and many of them are either newcomers to Canada or they have been here their whole lives, but they are here in Canada legally and able to participate as surrogates. This next question is, how old can someone be? I'm going to bring Cindy on as well. How old does someone need to be to become a surrogate legally, Cindy?
It's a minimum age of 21 set by the federal legislation.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, has there been a case in Canada where the surrogate has kept the baby?
Not that I'm aware of. It would be very challenging for her to do that. There would be an awful lot of proof suggesting that it's not her baby. So if she came into my office for legal assistance, the first thing I would say is, who were the lawyers who drafted the contract? And they're likely to hopefully have been good fertility lawyers, and I would know something's not right. The next thing I would do is ask what clinic, and I would contact the clinic. And, if it was Dr. Liebrak, he would confirm it's a surrogacy. She'd signed all the consents, and I'd say, okay, we've got somebody with a mental health problem. And we'd contact the agency and say, let's get some support and find out what's going on here and keep the IPs calm. But if none of that worked, a lawyer should say, yeah, I'll help you. I want, $1 million retainer because this is going nowhere fast. The judge would not. With all that evidence, the judge would rule it's in the best interest of the child. But we want to prevent that horrendous situation. And we do that by working with good service providers. A good agency would have provided her support, seeing something was going wrong well in that pregnancy. That should have been picked up.
The next question is for Dr. Liebrak, and it is from a potential surrogate who says she suffered from postpartum depression in her last journey and wonders if that would disqualify her as a surrogate.
No, I think it depends on how severe it was. I hope it wasn't self-harming type of depression. But generally, there's so many, as we talked about, antidepressants that can help someone that's in that situation. So it'd be really important that they have proper counseling and that they're seen after the birth to make sure that they're coping well with the postpartum situation. And certainly the treatments are very effective for women like that. So I wouldn't disqualify them, but I think they need to understand that it could happen again.
Absolutely. Okay, that's it for questions. Thank you, Cindy and Dr. Liebrak. Really appreciate you joining us today and answering these questions. And hopefully this will help you as you are reviewing profiles or putting your profile together as intended parents to look at the surrogacy process from your own perspective and what is important to you and what you value around communication, and then as well from a legal perspective and a health perspective. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
This link with links to connect with both Create and Cindy. So thank you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.